You mentioned earlier that the statement about blind spots are, what did you say?
Your blind spot is your breakthrough or
Your
intention.
blind spot is your breakthrough.
Yes.
So I'm very curious about that. And we were talking about that piece, and I let one thought go because
Okay.
we were on a roll. But I want to go back to it. So how do you prioritize? So let's say I start looking at my blind spots, I get feedback, and I get a lot of feedback. And there's 47 things that come up, and probably and 9 of them are intense.
Mhm.
How do you advise people on how to prioritize? Okay, what do I work first? Because even if you're working on 9, that's
Mhm.
way too many probably.
Mhm.
And you mentioned your coach had said, "What's one small thing you can change?" But
Mhm.
what what do you recommend? How do they prioritize that?
Mhm. Yeah, usually I would say we try to get to 3 key themes, and they often collapse. Some of them will collapse.
Yeah,
And I don't like people trying to work on more than 3 things. It's just there's something magical about the number 3.
hour of 3. Yep.
Yeah. In terms of prioritizing, I actually leave that a lot. By the time we've collapsed the information to 3 themes, they're all 3 are pretty strong and will have significant positive impact, as they work through them. But I like to move to where my clients like to move, where they feel there's going to be a particular payoff, where they feel particularly invested. Now, that could be certain stakeholders. Like sometimes the feedback is a little bit different with how they manage up versus sideways versus down. So maybe they're going to pick sort of a stakeholder group that feels they're more inspired. It's really looking for like, what are you inspired to change? What feedback really excites you about changing? And then sometimes it's just criticality of a certain business unit that absolutely needs their attention, or so I kind of let my client decide. But I really try to get them to collapse it into 3 themes, like because the blind spots will tell you like what impact you're having on somebody, but they don't always completely, without the conversation with my client around what is your intention and what are you trying to accomplish. Sometimes there'll be really negative impact statements, and people will say they're being deliberate. So they're experimenting with the style. Maybe they're
Yeah.
trying to be, one common example is they're trying to be an agitator. So maybe there's a certain group of people that are a little bit complacent, and they're trying to agitate this group. So they're experimenting with some leadership behaviors to kind of shake things up a little bit. And they don't really realize that those leadership behaviors, maybe are not landing. They're not really landing. Like people are not getting the memo, right?
Yeah, just upsetting
And
them.
exactly. So
Yeah.
sometimes there's like some obvious things like that where it's like, what, this is just not working as a tactic. Like, how are we going to experiment with? I get what you're trying to do. You're trying to shake up this complacent group, but what are some other ways that are more, that could be more positive, that could be received? Or also just maybe there's a need for more transparency about what you're actually doing, and see
Yeah.
what ideas the team has to get that outcome. So I guess that's how it's really, we jointly prioritize a little bit in terms of, because they know the other side of the coin. When I'm doing this investigation, I'm just hearing all the data points. So we have to kind of look at it together and figure out where's the biggest bang for the buck.
I'm struck by the book, The One Thing, by Gary Keller, where he talked about what's one thing you can do that'll make everything else easier or unnecessary.
Mhm.
And are you ever finding that? And I love the power of 3,
Mhm.
but I do find sometimes with my client, they can't do more than 1. Do you find
Mhm.
that also, that there's like one that you have 3 and they're all important, but it's like, oh, this one really jumps out because this is going to have the bigger impact.
Absolutely. I think I only want them working on one at a time, but for the most part, I'm
Okay.
working with people for 6 to 8 months, sometimes 12 months. So we can get through all 3 in a program, but we're
Yeah.
looking for one at a time, Absolutely.
Cool.